Good morning, grade 5. So, who thought I would be doing this from home? Not me, but it's all good. So, what we're going to do, I had promised you that we would start our new chapter book this week, and we still are, except I'm the only one who has it right now, I think. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it to you today. I'm going to introduce you to it. I'll read you the first few chapters. Tomorrow, we'll do an online group chat so we can go over the information. So what I want you to do right now, grab a piece of paper, so I'm going to wait, and a pen or a pencil, and go. I'm waiting, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. You got your paper? So what I want you to do, any words you don't understand, the exact same way we did it with our other book, Winn-Dixie, I want you to write down any words that you don't understand. So even if you're not sure how to spell them, no worries. As long as you know what you've written down, you'll be able to ask me tomorrow. Okay? Ready? I'm going to put on my glasses so that I can read better. So, the book is Frindle. It's by Andrew Clements, who won an award for writing it. So I'm going to read to you the back of it just so you have an idea of what we're in store for, but I promise, amazing. No dog, but amazing. It says, is Nick Allen a troublemaker? So we already know. Probably the main person in this book is named Nick Allen. He really just likes to liven things up at school, and he's always had plenty of great ideas. When Nick learns some interesting information about how words are created, suddenly he's got the inspiration for his best plan ever, the Frindle. Who says a pen has to be called a pen? Why not call it a Frindle? Things begin innocently enough as Nick gets his friends to use the new word. Then other people in town start saying Frindle. Soon the school is in an uproar, and Nick has become a local hero. His teacher wants Nick to put an end to all this nonsense. But the funny thing is, Frindle doesn't belong to Nick anymore. The new word is spreading across the country, and there's nothing Nick can do to stop it. Dun, dun, dun. All right, ready? Chapter 1. Nick. So we are going to find out some information about him. If you ask the kids and the teachers at Lincoln Elementary School to make 3 lists, all the really bad kids, all the really smart kids, and all the really good kids, Nick Allen would not be on any of them. Nick deserved a list all his own, and everyone knew it. Was Nick a troublemaker? Hard to say. One thing is for sure. Nick Allen had plenty of ideas, and he knew what to do with them. Well, that sounds good. One time in 3rd grade, Nick decided to turn Miss Deaver's room into a tropical island. What kid in New Hampshire isn't ready for a little summer in February? So, first he got everyone to make small palm trees out of green and brown construction paper and taped them onto the corners of each desk. Miss Deaver had only been a teacher for about 6 months, and she was delighted. She said, "That's so cute." I've been a teacher much longer, guys, just saying. The next day, all the girls wore paper flowers in their hair, and all the boys wore sunglasses and beach hats. Miss Deaver clapped her hands and said, "It's so colorful." The day after that, Nick turned the classroom thermostat up to about 90 degrees with a little screwdriver he had brought from home. All the kids changed into shorts and t-shirts with no shoes. And when Miss Deaver left the room for a minute, Nick spread about 10 cups of fine white sand all over the classroom floor. Miss Deaver was surprised again at just how creative her students could be. I would not be happy. But the sand got tracked out into the hallway where Manny the custodian did not think it was creative at all, and he stomped right down to the office. The principal followed the trail of sand, and when she arrived, Miss Deaver was teaching the hula to some kids near the front of the room, and a tall, thin, shirtless boy with chestnut hair was just spiking a Nerf volleyball over a net made from 6 t-shirts tied together. The hula, by the way, is a type of dance that you do in Hawaii. The third grade trip to the South Seas ended suddenly, but that didn't stop Nick from trying to liven things up. Lincoln Elementary needed a good jolt once in a while, and Nick was just the guy to deliver it. About a year later, Nick made the great blackbird discovery. One night, he learned on a TV show that red-winged blackbirds give this high-pitched chirp when a hawk or some other danger comes near. Because of the way sound travels, the hunter birds can't tell where the high-pitched chirp is coming from. The next day during silent reading, see, they do silent reading too, Nick glanced at his teacher and he noticed that Mrs. Avery's nose was curved, kind of like the beak of a hawk. So Nick let out a high, squeaky blackbird peep. Mrs. Avery jerked her head up from her book and looked around. She couldn't tell who did it, so she just said, "Shh," to the whole class. A minute later, Nick did it again, louder. Peep! This time, there was a little giggling from the class, but Mrs. Avery pretended not to hear the sound, and about 15 seconds later, she slowly stood up and walked to the back of the classroom. Without taking his eyes off his book and without moving at all, Nick put his heart and soul into the highest and most annoying chirp of all. Peep! Mrs. Avery pounced. "Janet Fisk, you stop that this instant!" Janet, who was sitting 4 rows away from Nick, promptly turned white, then bright crimson, very red. Can you imagine how she's feeling? "But it wasn't me, honest." There was a catch in Janet's voice, as if she might cry. Mrs. Avery knew she had made a mistake, and she apologized to Janet. "But someone is asking for big trouble," said Mrs. Avery, looking more like a hawk every second. Nick kept reading, and he didn't make a peep. At lunchtime, Nick talked to Janet. He felt bad that Mrs. Avery had pounced on her. Janet lived in Nick's neighborhood, and sometimes they played together. She was good at baseball, and she was better at soccer than most of the kids in the whole school, boys or girls. Nick said, "Hey, Janet, I'm sorry you got yelled at during reading. It was my fault. I was the one who made that sound." "You did?" said Janet. "But how come Mrs. Avery thought it was me?" So Nick told her about the blackbirds, and Janet thought it was pretty interesting. Then she tried making a peep or two, and Janet's chirps were even higher and squeakier than Nick's. She promised to keep everything a secret. For the rest of Nick's 4th grade year, at least once a week, Mrs. Avery heard a loud peep from somewhere in her classroom. Sometimes it was a high-pitched chirp, and sometimes it was a very high-pitched chirp. Mrs. Avery never figured out who was making that sound, and gradually she trained herself to ignore it, but she still looked like a hawk. To Nick, the whole thing was just one long and successful science experiment, and Janet Fisk enjoyed it too. That's chapter 1. So what I want you to do, any words you don't understand, and I want you to sit and think about the 3 most important things you learned in this chapter. So 3 things probably that you now know about Nick. All right, so take a little bit of time. I'm going to move on. I'm going to ask you to do it. I'm going to be able to do 2 chapters, and then you'll have your homework, or yes, because you are at home, it's not classwork. Your homework will be to make notes of anything you can remember from it. I know this is tricky. I'm just asking you to try. Tomorrow, I see you again, and I will see you. We'll do a conference call, and we'll talk about the book, and we'll make sure everybody is understanding what I've done so far, and then I will send you some questions, and you'll send them back to me. Good? All right. Ready? Chapter 2, called Mrs. Granger. Oh boy. 5th grade was different. That was the year to get ready for middle school. So this is high school in the States and elementary school in the United States. And so they do, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4 is elementary school, 5, 6, 7, 8 is middle school, 9, 10, 11, 12 is high school. So it's a little bit different. 5th grade meant passing classes. It meant no morning recess. Ooh. It meant real letter grades on your report cards. But most of all, it meant Mrs. Granger. So lots of things different than our school because we do numbers already. There were about 150 kids in 5th grade. And there were 7 5th grade teachers, 2 math, 2 science, 2 social studies, but only 1 language arts teacher. In language arts, Mrs. Granger had a monopoly and a reputation. So Mrs. Granger is the English teacher for all the students. Hey, I see a similarity. Mrs. Granger lived alone in a tidy little house in the older part of town. She drove an old pale blue car to school every morning, rain or shine, snow or sleet, hail or wind. She had a perfect attendance record that stretched back farther than anyone could remember, so she never missed school. Her hair was almost white, swept away from her face and up into something like a nest on the back of her head. I think we call that a bun. Unlike some of the younger women teachers, she never wore pants to school. She had 2 skirt and jacket outfits, her gray uniform and her blue uniform, which she always wore over a white shirt with a little cameo pin at the neck. A cameo pin has a picture of like a little lady, and it's done in white. So it's usually oval in shape, at least the ones that my grandmother used to have. It was oval in shape. It had the picture of a lady on it, and they used to put it up at the top of their shirts where the top button was, just to kind of make it look fancy instead of a necklace maybe. And Mrs. Granger was one of those people who never sweats. It had to be over 90 degrees before she even took off her jacket. She was small, as teachers go. There were even some 5th graders who were taller. But Mrs. Granger seemed like a giant. It was her eyes that did it. They were dark gray, and if she turned them on full power, they could make you feel like a speck of dust. Her eyes could twinkle and laugh too, and kids said she could crack really funny jokes. But it wasn't the jokes that made her famous. Everyone was sure that Mrs. Granger had X-ray vision. Don't even think about chewing a piece of gum within 50 feet of her. My llama chewing gummers. If you did, Mrs. Granger would see you and catch you and make you stick the gum onto a bright yellow index card. Then she would safely pin the card to the front of your shirt, and you'd have to wear it for the rest of the school day. After that, you had to take it home and have your mom or dad sign the card and bring it back to Mrs. Granger the next day. And it didn't matter to Mrs. Granger if you weren't in 5th grade, because the way she saw it, sooner or later, you would be. All the kids at Lincoln Elementary School knew that at the end of the line, 5th grade, Mrs. Granger would be the one reading their spelling tests and their reading tests, and worst of all, their vocabulary tests, week after week, month after month. So hang on, I made a mistake. It obviously goes to grade 5 if that's the end of the line, and then maybe 6, 7, 8. I don't really know how this works, to be honest, at the end of the line for 5th grade. I'm not sure, to be honest. Every language arts teacher in the world enjoys making kids use the dictionary. Check your spelling, check that definition, check those syllable breaks. But Mrs. Granger didn't just enjoy the dictionary, she loved the dictionary, almost worshipped it. Her weekly vocabulary list was 35 words long, sometimes longer. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was a word for the day on the blackboard every morning. If you gave yourself a day off and didn't write one down and look it up and learn the definition, sooner or later Mrs. Granger would find out, and then just for you, there would be 2 words for the day for a whole week. I like the idea of word of the day. Maybe once we're back at school, we'll try that. Mrs. Granger kept a full set of 30 dictionaries on a shelf at the back of the room. But her pride and joy was one of those huge dictionaries with every word in the universe in it, the kind of book it takes 2 kids to carry. It sat on its own little table at the front of her classroom, sort of like the altar at the front of a church. So like the bema. Every graduate of Lincoln Elementary School for the past 35 years could remember standing at that table listening to Mrs. Granger's battle cry, "Look it up! That's why we have the dictionary!" Even before the school year started, when it was still the summer before 5th grade for Nick and his friends, Mrs. Granger was already busy. Every parent of every new 5th grader got a letter from her. Nick's mom read part of it out loud during dinner one night in August. Every home is expected to have a good dictionary in it so that each student can do his or her homework properly. Good spelling and good grammar and good word skills are essential for every student. Clear thinking requires a command of the English language, and 5th grade is the ideal time for every girl and boy to acquire an expanded vocabulary. So that was her letter to all the parents. And then there was a list of the dictionaries that Mrs. Granger thought would be acceptable for home study. Mrs. Allen said, "It's so nice to have a teacher who takes her work this seriously." Nick groaned and tried to enjoy the rest of his hamburger, but even watermelon for dessert didn't cheer him up much. Nick had no particular use for the dictionary. He liked words a lot, and he was good at using them. But he figured that he got all the words he needed just by reading, and he read all the time. When Nick ran into a word he didn't know, he asked his brother or his dad or whoever was handy what it meant, and if they knew, they would tell him. But not Mrs. Granger. He had heard all about her, and he had seen 5th graders in the library last year, noses stuck in their dictionaries, frantically trying to finish their vocabulary sheets before English class. It was still a week before school, and Nick already felt like 5th grade was going to be a very long year. And that is the end of chapter 2 of Frindle. So, I know I read for about 15 minutes because that's what my timer is telling me. Again, you can go back, you can listen to me again. Anything you don't understand, take the time to write it down. It's great, you're not reading, so you can go back, listen through. So words you don't understand, and from each chapter, I want to know 3 things that you thought were the most important. All right, tomorrow I have you again. We will meet tomorrow. I have you second period tomorrow. It's Thursday, so we will meet, we will discuss, and we will go from there. To end, I have a joke. What did the left eye say to the right eye? Between us, something smells. All right, guys, have a good rest of the day. Do your work, keep busy, don't get bored, go outside, breathe some fresh air, stay healthy. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.